My name is Nolan Hack. I am a black revolutionary from Los Angeles, California.
Illari Chaska, interested in the liberation of Semanawak.
My name's Julia Wallace. I am a black female revolutionary born and raised in Los Angeles, and I'm an organizer in LA and internationally.
California. All right. So the topic at hand tonight on this Valentine's Day, 2018, the deadly violence of white supremacy. I was reading an article about the Colton Bushi case, and Colton's brother said, "I want justice, so I don't take it into my own hands." And that kind of struck a chord with me because I'm thinking, well, one way or another, we have to take justice into our own hands. So this is never going to stop. Then the argument becomes, well, are we talking, violent action or the non-violent route? But if we keep waiting around for the Canadian government or the American government or their white populace to finally stop what they've been doing to us, we're never going to get out of this. We have to push the needle ourselves. So what are y'all's thoughts on this topic? Especially we're only in month 2 of 2018 and we're over 100 deaths by cops in the United States. I mean, we can go from this from many different angles. I mean, before we started recording, me and Illari we were talking about how almost all of our murders are not talked about in the media. And I was just interested that Colton's case, it has been talked about in the media. It's even leaked over to American news. And I just found that interesting because especially for indigenous people, it's very rare for one of their murders to be talked about in the media.
Yes, because that's true. Because it's not a lot. It's not common knowledge. At least last time I checked that, statistically speaking, what we call Native Americans actually have a high murder rate from the police than any other group. And even if you were to add on like people that are so-called Latinos or Hispanics, because these are like forced identities, that number would skyrocket.
That's true. That is true. I've thought about that before myself. The continued genocide of indigenous people, it's like it's in the underbelly of America. Nobody knows and nobody wants to know. And, especially white America and white Canada are perfectly fine with that. That's the way they want it.
Well, I was also looking up on YouTube, like just news reports on the case, and there were a few people that were uploading their opinion on it, and they were like European males, and it was really like actually pretty disgusting to watch because a lot of it was just like making excuses for murder. Like it's just like same thing as I seen this one guy like looking for pictures that would make the indigenous young man look bad, and he's a picture of him sticking the middle finger, at least somebody that looks like him or something, and I was like, what does that have to do with being murdered? Like, so it's kind of like the same thing they did with every other African person. They always try to bring up all this other stuff that has nothing to do with the case.
And they always blame us for our own deaths and murders.
Yeah, and like, so there's like the people who are paid to like troll, but it's also a way to justify dehumanization of people. And, you know, if the person is murdered is a thug, not a human being, not, you know, a young person who was unarmed, but just the decision is just that they're a thug or they're a this or they're a criminal, then it's a lot easier to be able to do that. And, you know, today, this person, Nicholas Cruz or whatever, who murdered 17 people in Florida, you know, it's like you're waiting for the race of the person to come out. Like, if they're white, then they're not going to be labeled like that. They're going to be called a troubled person, even if they're the murderer. And then you have someone like Uzi, who was murdered, and he's supposed to be the criminal. Like, he's the victim, and he's labeled as a criminal. This person who's murdered 17 people, even though they murdered probably other white people, is going to be, depending on how he gets identified in the media, his close proximity to whiteness, he's going to be either a troubled teen, or if he's Latino or anything, then he'll be, oh, well, now that's why we need to build a wall. Like, it's this kind of like moment before his race is like discussed, and then he either is going to be a troubled human being or he's going to be an illegal, or whatever terminology that they use, the racist terminology.
You bring up a good point regarding that. Kind of like they paint their own picture of the situation. Because like you said, like you mentioned, you got to build that wall because Mexicans are rapists, basically. I mean, that's what Trump said. And it's insane, like, what reality they live in when, statistically speaking, look at the statistics. I mean, it's not Mexicans raping people, it's European men. They're all raping people. Like, and so, like you said, they're a lot of the times they're not using the word terrorist for some of these things. But usually, if it's somebody from the Middle East, there isn't really a question to use that type of label, even though who knows if he even was associated with anything like that.
I think we got John on. John, you want to announce yourself?
Yeah, John Kane here from Let's Talk Native, and happy to be a part of the conversation again.
Great to have you, John. Especially as a Native person and a Native man, what's your thought on Colton's case and murder and everything tied within it nationally and internationally, or continentally, I guess you could say, North America, South America?
Well, you know, again, you don't have to go that far back in history to hear rhetoric that slogans like "Good Indian, the Dead Indian." I mean, that was a sentiment that was widely shared. I mean, amongst white people in both the U.S. and Canada. I oftentimes talk about L. Frank Baum, who was the author of The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, who also wrote what most people recognize or call the Baum genocide editorials, where he talked about the fact that what Native people had become were beneath contempt. And although he had this kind of backhanded way of viewing Native people through this prism of the noble savage of the past, his view was what we had become weren't worthy of life, and that we should be annihilated, exterminated, and that we would do more to preserve our legacy by allowing ourselves to be remembered fondly in the past rather than remain being the whining cur that licks the hand that smites them, which is the language that. So, I mean, that's out there, and it's not ancient history, and it's something that does get brought forward. So when you consider that in the context of Colton Bushy's murder, realize that even in a country like Canada that loves to promote itself as this nice place, as this champion of human rights and that kind of stuff, the amount of racism that exists in Canada is significant. And you see it in every one of the comments that have been broadcast all over the internet, all over social media, all over any forum associated with any publication, where so many people are saying that killing an Indian who trespassed on our land is justified, even though under Canadian law it is against the law to use firearms to protect property. I mean, this isn't like stand your ground laws in Florida. Canada, as a nation, supposed to have a higher standard for using deadly force than the United States, and yet this guy walks away fully acquitted of any charges, having shot a young boy or a young man in the back of the head, almost point blank range, with a pistol that he fired 2 other times first. So, I mean, there's very little question that race has played a huge role, not only in Colton's case, but certainly with an all-white jury, all-white judges, all-white lawyers, a white perpetrator accused, and a brown-faced, a brown murdered face.
The police, once they told Colton's family that he was dead, one of the cops said to his mother, "Ma'am, were you drinking?" And then she says, "No." And then they smelled her breath, and she obviously felt very insulted. And when she heard, she obviously was devastated. But they didn't make it worse. Like, oh, let's make the family look horrible. So it's that much easier to make Colton look like he deserved it.
Well, the whole insult to injury stuff notwithstanding, this all runs back to the whole idea of not just victim shaming, but after the fact trying to justify whatever, heinous act gets committed against somebody, whether it's, trying to victim shame a girl for rape, or and we see this in every one of these cases the Black Lives Matter causes is trying to stand up for, where the first thing they try to do is bring up somebody's criminal record if they are the victim of a murder, and so to suggest that somehow that their lifestyle choices have led them to be in a situation where their murder is justified. And the thing is, what gets missed in all this stuff is that the very lifestyle choices that many of us are forced to make are a result of racist policies in the first place. So whether we're talking about the girls that are so easily characterized as runaways because their prospects for the future are so grim living on some of our native territories, or they're grim as a marginalized people in an urban environment. So the idea of victim shaming young girls for looking for better paths to a future is the way they justify not ever investigating missing and murdered Indigenous women. And in the situation, look, at 22 years old, nobody's future has been laid out at 22 years old. Nobody's future has, unless they are murdered. Then the future has been ended, and that's what's happened here.
It's continued trauma, tragedy, honestly, hell on earth in so many of these situations. And you bring up the missing and murdered Indigenous women. In the United States alone, there's over 60,000 missing black women and girls, and I rarely hear a tweet by a news station or publication or on TV about it. Like, oh, this black girl is missing, in Seattle or Chicago, whatever, and yet there's 60,000 of them. I mean, who the heck knows what's happened to them? And a lot of them, sadly, children are in sex slavery. 40% of child trafficking victims in the United States are black, and that's not talked about. Just like the majority of our double genocide has lasted so long, and that.
But you don't get Amber Alerts for black children.
No, you don't. It's amazing, and the numbers just by rates, black and Native girls and women so much more. They go missing so much more than white women or white girls. Yet Elizabeth Smart, we still talk about her, as we should. Was it John Benet Ramsey? We still talk about her. I think there was like a mini series that happened or supposed to happen on CBS. Yet someone like Sarah Lee Circlebear, Kira Friedman, Ayanna Jones, we don't talk about them at all, and then we blame them, like we were talking about before. I've met, and I'm lucky enough to be friends with Ayanna Jones's grandmother, Marcella. The police still harass her and her family. She still fights the Detroit Police Department to try to get justice for Ayanna. And they blame her. They blame Ayanna's father. They blame the family. Well, if her father hadn't been doing all this stuff, she'd still be alive. You killed a child. That's the end of the discussion. It's a very short discussion, and we move on. But no. It's always all our fault. And that goes, all the way back to the manifest destiny of taking this whole land from Native people and dragging us here to work for free.
Well, and one of the distinctions, and I don't bring this up just because I want to play a numbers game, but it's true. If you look at the overall volume of missing women in particular, you're right. You're going to see a lot more women who are black or Hispanic because their numbers are significantly more. But on a percentage basis, on a proportional basis, Native women turn up missing at a much higher rate based on our small population. And here's the thing, because many women of color who turn up missing from Hispanic or the black communities are in urban environments, they can suggest that they're inundated, with these kinds of things. But many of the Native women who turn up missing are in very rural areas where people do know each other. And it is not that there's an inundation of these people. It's just that there still ends up being a determined, limited number of resources to throw at missing and murdered Indigenous women. Now, and I'm not trying to make this in a competition amongst people of color, because I think all people of color suffer this plight, especially our women and our children, at a much higher rate than white people. And you can go, and again, across the line, it's Adam Walsh. It's not just these little white girls, but there's a reason that they call this thing an Amber Alert, and it's because it's a little white girl that it's named after. And so that's why we still are plagued with these issues. And honestly, if they threw every person of color on one of those Amber Alerts, they know that they would be inundated with the stuff, and they choose not to. So they are selective on how they use this kind of call because they want to target who they think are the most valuable people and the most worth saving. We don't rate high enough on those lists.
We don't. White women are like white women are treated like an endangered species in this society. Well, we have two women of color, one black and one indigenous. What do you two think about just that issue of black women, black girls, Native women, Native girls being kidnapped, and no one's talking about it?
I think that, like I said before, it's just a continuation of the foundation of the squatter nation since 1492. There's always, indigenous women have always been seen as something to be used by the bigger society. It's always a justification. I mean, like we mentioned before, that the way that it's portrayed in the media, starting with like Pocahontas, their Road to El Dorado, it's always like a sexualization, but it's really more about their kind of psychology, where they have to justify in their head their ugliness. Usually the victim, the person making someone a victim, has to somehow justify it. So I think that this going on is just, to me, it's just a continuation, because nothing really has ended. It's just that now we live in a modern society surrounded by other things. We think that everything's okay now, but it's not. It's still stolen land. So to me, it's just a continuation.
I think that it is a continuation. Black girls and women and indigenous girls, indigenous women have been the least valued in this society, and in most societies in general. And a lot of it has been culturally inculcated. Like, there's a lot of issues with that. But I do want to also point out, though, so if we're talking about, like, taking people's lives seriously, there's no question that this society values white life and claims to value white women's lives. They certainly value them more than Native and black women and girls. But they don't value their lives either. They really, there's thousands, tens of thousands of untested rape kits in every major city, all different cities. They don't care. They don't do anything with them. And the only time that they do is when somebody's got money, and then maybe they'll do something with it, or that maybe there's some kind of social pressure. But they don't do anything with those white people's lives either. The people that got murdered today in Florida, they don't care. And most of the time in these, like, mass school shootings, they're killing other white people. They don't care about them. They're going to cut SNAP benefits, and who's the majority of people that are on welfare and on food stamps? It's white people. They don't care about them either. They care about them more, and culturally they do, and also economically. It's more useful to have those people believe in this wealthy capitalist culture, so that they buy into it and that they defend it. But in reality, they're expendable too. And I'm not saying that to champion them. I'm saying that to say that there's no question that our lives as black women, as indigenous women, and the mixture of the two, that our lives are worth nothing to them, and that we're completely expendable to them. But in reality, there's a very small group of people whose lives are valued by this society at all. And I think wealth and power play a factor in it. And I just wanted to also mention that.
There's 400,000 rape kits sit untested on shelves across the nation. Close to 90% of rape victims who go to the hospital after their assault have to pay for their medical costs, and rape kits are included in that, which is asinine. To add to your point, Julia, it's the one thing that really just sticks in my craw with the whole smash of our double genocide is the majority of the public wants to, like the word Canada uses, the reconciliation. Let's just hold hands and talk this out, and you were wrong and I was wrong. No. Y'all were wrong. Y'all are still wrong. Admit it. Let's have a conversation. but that whitewashed and white-splaining vocabulary gets us absolutely nowhere. And we keep, it's basically like we are accepting the crimes and the disgusting ideology of the past and the creation of America, because they got the reconciliation thing up there. We got this resistance down here. I mean, there's a Facebook group. I think it's got like 3 million people on it, and it's something liberal this or Democratic thumbs up, something like that. And FDR is the avatar, and I'm just sitting there like,
oh, gross.
This guy, he put Japanese people in internment camps. Japanese women were raped in the worst ways. They put Native people in internment camps. Lied to black people who went to war. The New Deal was for white people, the white deal, and that they're still no. We love that. We want that back. You know, we want liberal values, or other people. We want conservative values. Spin it whatever way you want, left, center, right. That all ends in our demise, and our continued demise. And
well, left center, right of what? And this is where I always come back to, is because people talk about any of these circumstances. At some point, we, especially as Native people, have to decide: are we expecting that system to protect us? We're looking for American champions? I mean, that's the problem that I have with the truth and reconciliation. This is what about Canada or the United States? What, trying to make right the past? No, I mean, the problem is, what does our future look like? And and I think any people of color have got to decide, but certainly Native people got to decide, where is our future? Is our future is that in trying to carve out equity within the system, within the colonial system that has been oppressing us for 500 years, or do we start to say we need to start having a different vision going forward on not only about risk management, for one thing, how we interact with the outside culture or the dominant culture around us, but what do we do to secure ourselves? Well, I mean, it's fine to talk about the dangers that women have in general, but certainly that our women have even more magnified. But what are we doing about it? Because if we're just saying that we want, I mean, and I get the whole rape kit thing, and again the gender persecution. But at the end of the day, this isn't about protecting women. It's about protecting the men who have damaged these women, and women of color in particular. So what do we do? I mean, how do we secure our families? How do we secure our daughters? How do we secure our children? And what is the path forward? Because if we think the path forward is getting reparations or getting another law on the books, I mean, when the Violence Against Women Act passed a number of years ago, they put a little pilot program in there where they were going to allow a few very assimilated tribes to perhaps try to prosecute white people who committed crimes against Native people, because they couldn't do it in the past. The law prohibits it. But I'll tell you, trying to add that in as a pilot program of some sort of piece of legislation, I found that to be insulting, because this wasn't about recognizing our sovereignty and our right to protect our people. This was about saying, okay, we're going to allow you to fashion your system so much like ours that we're going to feel comfortable enough that you're not going to be vindictive against the white people who commit crimes against you.
I feel that way about the black caucuses that we have across the country, and then that's the national one. Go, Julia. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, those people, if you look at like their political pedigree, they've been around for decades, right? So it's kind of a trip. Like, some people went through COINTELPRO, they had to go underground, they were murdered or psychologically destroyed tortured, put in mental institutions, killed, like with, and you could go down the list of Panthers throughout the country, and yet these other people have managed to not only survive, but to make a couple bucks off of it. They're suspect to me. Who doesn't get touched during that time period? People who have made their peace and continue to make their peace with capitalism. And you can have any kind of rhetoric that some people have, and, whatever people say, reclaiming my time, but it's like, okay, those are words. Like, what happened? Your husband owns a bank. Like, what is that? And so to me, like, I'm very suspicious of, I look at people's, like, social positions. Like, what are you doing? Who are you? Not necessarily, like, what their personality is or moments they take to shine, because people sometimes talk a lot of crap when they know they're not going to win. So they're like, oh, blah, 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 I'm claiming our time, I hate you, Trump, you're terrible. It's like, oh, okay, well, then what happened when, like, other dude was in office? They weren't saying nothing about that. Police were still murdering us in the streets. And we were still, like, there's still kind of social issues that we had to deal with. So to me, we have to kind of rely on the poorest people. We have to rely on the most oppressed people. We can't rely on people who have grown and grown wealthy during the largest redistribution away from the majority of black people in U.S. history.
So we're voting no on Oprah 2020?
Dude, no to all billionaires. No to all of them. Especially because, like,
the whole idea of supporting candidates because of the color of their skin, I find that repulsive. The whole idea, I mean, including folks like Kamala Harris and Tulsi Gabbard and this Native woman who was running for governor of Idaho. Look, just because somebody's Native doesn't mean that they're a champion of, or Native or black or a person of color, that they are champions of people of color. Diane Humatiwa, when she got put in as a federal judge down in Arizona, everybody thought, oh, look how great it is. There's a Native federal judge. She was nominated by John McCain and Jeff Flake, two Republicans. And the first case that she's had to adjudicate involving Native people, she ruled against the Native people, and it had to do with a highway that was going to desecrate Native land. So, and everybody said, oh, she should be on the Supreme Court. She's a Republican, for Christ's sake. And yet everybody says, oh, but she's the right color. Well, I'm sorry. Every time I see a person of color who tries, and it's a Native person in particular, who tries to run in that system, I say, well, we lost another one. That's another one that we lost, because now they're in their system. Now they're not representing us. They didn't champion our issues. Now they're trying to endear themselves to the white constituency that they need to elect them.
I completely agree. Tammy Duckworth reminds me of what you're talking about, what you two were talking about. She's first Asian American woman to be elected to Congress in Illinois, first disabled woman to be elected to Congress, first member of Congress born in Thailand. Okay, but she also helped pass legislation to give the military $700 billion. She's aligned with a Zionist organization. She's taken money from Exelon Corp, and they operate fossil generation portfolio, nearly, 10,000 megawatts. Also, she's taken money from Northrop Grumman. Their equipment is used to pummel the hell out of Yemeni people in Yemen. So yeah, I mean, and I'm speaking of myself. I'm disabled. I'm colored, but just because Tammy is disabled and colored does not mean that. Doesn't mean anything. I mean, like you said, John, once you get that far up the ladder in politics in this country, like you said, we've lost them. When Chelsea Manning said, "I'm running," I was, oh no, there goes Chelsea. And of course, he's been hanging around neo-Nazis, so that's a whole other story. But that to me, that just points to how much longer are we going to believe in a system designed to destroy us, to help us.
Well,
go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Well, I think that goes back to like how there was a mention about trying to change laws within an illegal nation, basically. And it's just like I think it goes back to lack, like, generally, like not being maybe like knowing the true history, or has to do a lot more with education. So like, most people, they, for example, this is Squatter Nation, 1776. It's founded on genocide. Every other nation on this continent is also illegal. Mexico is not run by people that we consider Mexicans. It was created as a Criollo state. Criollo just means European born in that area. Their independence, that's not my independence. That's the independence of Spaniards to Spaniards, just like British and Americans. Same thing when we're mentioning laws. When people say, well, Mexico sold its land, what are you talking about? There's two pirates selling to each other. There's no indigenous people involved in all that mess, all these artificial borders, and even scratching it down further. We're not Latino, we're not Hispanic, we're not mestizo, we're not raza, we're none of those things. We're the original people of this continent. Just because our DNA was invaded doesn't mean we have to identify as something else. So I think it goes back to we're not processing that there's literally, how are you going to carve yourself in to white supremacy? It's like trying to make a deal with them. You can't. Like, the deal is they're not even supposed to be here. That's the deal.
And the question is, what do we do? I mean, my point is, if we think that we just have to carve out comfortable niches within the system, and then fight like hell to protect them. I mean, they just did this State of Indian Nations address by NCAI, and Jefferson Keel stands up and gives this, this great speech about how strong Indian nations are, and that now 7 more tribes have been granted federal recognition. This whole notion that the federal government grants us the right to be recognized. For one thing, what federal recognition means is a tribe, band, or nation of Indians subordinate to the laws of the United States. That's what they've been trying to impose on the Hawaiians, who are rejecting it. Yet we've got people lining up, say, "Oh, please, let me get be granted federal recognition. Let me have the federal government throw a bunch of money my way. Let me have the federal government suck money out of the resources out of my land and help me catch the money that drops off the table." I mean, we have to make some decisions on what we want our future to be, independent of what the federal strategy is. Because I got to tell you, it's not working for them either. These morons just elected Donald Trump. I mean, there can be no more of an indicator on how much of a failed system this is. But I'll tell you, the other thing is, when I hear people say, well, yeah, but, we can't blame this all on Russia because, almost this whole enemy of my enemy is my friend. Russia sold indigenous land to the United States in the form of Chaska, and they are an imperial power as well.
Exactly, which is a good point you brought up, that people start, like, during maybe the 80s, it was like the whole dichotomy of America versus the Russians, right? And the Russians were going into so-called Latin America, supporting people that did want to pretty much get rid of dictatorships that are run by Criollos, Europeans, right? And it's not like the Russians are like some sort of good guys. They're just trying to get that land, get in there too. So it's like you mentioned, they sold indigenous land too, so they're not any different.
Well,
I mean, they try to play that game that they are.
Look at the exploitation that's involved with tar sands oil in Alberta and the huge swaths of land that they are acquiring through South America for mineral extraction and lumber extraction and energy extraction. So, these imperial powers, I mean, they're all cut from the same cloth and the same mentality, because it's about money. And I think we have to be cautious on who we think are our friends and who we think we can align ourselves with, because we think, again, the whole enemy of my enemy is my friend. That's not true. Indigenous people
as a part of who we are, as a part of our real identity, we have a different relationship to the land than people who are into conquering and creating empires. And and yet you go through Indian country, either on the U.S. side or the American side, you're going to see Canadian flags flying on every one of our territories and American flags flying, and we're going to hear all this whole idea about Native veterans of armed forces and the code talkers and all these guys and all these heroes. Most of the powwows that take place in the United States have been redesignated as veterans powwows.
Oh, wow.
Check them out. Look how many of them are called Native American veterans powwows. And, like somehow our people who decided to throw on their uniform and be a part of their imperialistic power was a good thing for us or for anybody.
I think
that's a good point about the flag. Oh, sorry. It was like a good point about the flags, bringing up the flags, because a lot of people that are labeled Latino, they usually, they're trying to represent us through some sort of illegal state flag. And if you research all the history of the flags, those flags were literally made by Europeans. So it's kind of like, how is that? That has nothing to do with the people that are actually from that land. Like, it's even, like, you mentioned the veteran thing, and then you could go back to the religious thing where, like, the Virgin, the Guadalupe is, like, associated with Mexican culture, but Guadalupismo was literally associated truly with nationalistic Criollo European pride.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they have a church dedicated to the Virgin Mary over Ateocalli. So, that's just a symbol of, like, we conquered you. So, like, that's what I'm saying. I was, like, distorted. Like, it's just all distorted.
No, it's very disturbing to me and heartbreaking. And this goes back to the lack of coverage of our double genocide. You talk about Canada, you talk about the United States for indigenous people. Well, there's also South America. Indigenous lands, sovereign lands, and nations are continually threatened by colonial powers. You look at Brazil, which was a huge place for the slave trade. So many slaves coming in to Brazil, and Portuguese blood mixing with black blood, white blood mixing with black blood, of course. And in 2016, you have over 4,200 people killed by the police. 76% of those people were black. 80% of those victims were between the ages of 12 and 29. So this thing we're talking about right now, the deadly violence of white supremacy, it's all over the place. And then, of course, you can go all the way to Australia and New Zealand. Australia, like the 4th of July here, they have Australia Day, which recognizes when the English came in and started to ruin everything. So not only are they not going to talk about what they did to us, what they're still doing to us, they're going to force us to celebrate our own oppression. It's a worldwide thing. Obviously, Libya were being shipped in as slaves, sold as slaves. 53 of the 54 African nations have a U.S. military presence in them. You have Bears Ears being threatened in the United States, along with many other native land. I mean, the whole thing is obviously native land, but sacred land. There's just so much of it, and it's all over the world, really.
Well, but even that, I think a better look at the whole situation with this monuments issue. If our people weren't so willing to sit there and clap for themselves because a piece of land got designated a national monument because they thought that was going to somehow protect it for us, there you go again. It's the same thing. We're looking for niches in their system that we hope is somehow going to benefit us. I mean, most native lands are held in trust by the federal government on both the U.S. and the Canadian side. Almost all native lands are not, the land title is not native land title. It is U.S. land title held by the federal government for native use and enjoyment. And we don't do a goddamn thing about it. But everybody wants to talk about a fee-to-trust system, a system that allows land to be taken into trust for the use and enjoyment of native peoples. And yet we don't say, well, no, I don't want it held in trust by the federal government. I mean, one of the things that's unique about Haudenosaunee territories, at least in New York State, is that we actually own our lands. We have the actual original title. They're not New York State deeds. They aren't U.S. land deeds. They aren't held by and trust. And yet, even some of the so-called tribal leadership in New York has moved towards this idea of reacquiring lands that would be held in trust by the federal government for Native people. I mean, that again is us falling into that trap. The reason that the Bears Ears, is being invaded again is because the fight for Bears Ears was never completed. We allowed them to designate it, or we cheered when they designated some of these lands as national monuments as a way that somehow was going to protect our interest in it or our religiosity associated with the land. But the reality is, we never should have accepted that. We shouldn't accept them holding our land in trust for us or designating them as monuments just so they can somehow keep out development. We need to take ownership of our lands, and when we take ownership of it, we have to occupy the damn places. We can't just sit there and say, okay, that land is ours, and not make any commitment to live and to join that land, to be a part of that land again. That again goes back to the difference in the identity of indigenous people, where we're allowing that identity to be destroyed.
It's that, like you said, looking for niches in the system to benefit us, in your case, Native people. But I'll say us because we do the same thing. It's that drive for survival, even though we're kind of looking at it like, look, wait a minute, this is hurting us. Maybe it will benefit you individually by sticking with the system, accepting it, respecting it, and defending it. But
I think that in part of the situation is that there is kind of this like grooming of like a new guard of bureaucrats and gatekeepers who are like holding kind of the reins and like have decided, as folks have suggested, you can't fight the empire, so just try to get you a little piece of it, or we'll try to get some recognition and rah 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 because we've been like attacking it so viciously without much of a response that, well, at least we get this piece of it. And I think you're right, because in reality it only helps a few people be able to get theirs, and then not just and worse than that, to convince us that this is going to be beneficial to us, you know. To me, like, okay, the Black Panther movie looks like it's going to be a very exciting movie, and because there's such a desert wasteland of mistreatment and racism within film industry, people are excited about seeing this whole culture of a grouping of people. But at the same time, you have to like also think critically. I mean, sure, on a personal level, I'm sure I'm going to see it, but like on another level, it's like, okay, wait a minute, like, what is this glorifying? You know, it's glorifying monarchy over rebellion, And furthermore, you know, the actual, it's such a slap in the face that you have all these Black Panthers who are languishing in prison all over the country, you know, who've been locked up and have not betrayed the cause for 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, and more. And those people are locked up, and there's no reference to that. It's as if, oh, actually, we want people that, when people think of Black Panther, we want them to think of a comic book. We don't want them to think of, like, political revolutionaries that have, like, improved Black people's lives, that, like, put their lives on the line to challenge the state and challenge racism and challenge imperialism and capitalism. Like, we don't want that. We want it to be a fantasy land. And to me, like, it's very suspect, you know. And in entertainment value, it's one thing, right? I've watched a lot of different kinds of shows, I guess, but, like, there's different kinds of perspectives that are at play there, you know?
It's an appropriation. I mean, because, again, that word is going to mean something else to different people now. And I hear great things about the film, and I look forward to watching it as well. That one about, there's a native one out there, too, that I've heard nothing but bad things about, that I'll refuse to watch. Now, getting back to this, Hostiles, right. Now, getting back to this idea of settling for survivability, look, if I thought that's what a lot of this was, I guess I could embrace it, but I don't see this idea of settling for survivability. I see it people settling for comfort, and that's different. So the idea of finding that niche as a way to hide out and teach your children quietly, while so someday sons and daughters can rise up and fight where we stood still. Hell, if it was that, I'd be all for it. But what I'm seeing is not the idea of pledging allegiance to their flag, whatever flag they offer. It's about finding comfort within that system, and then we can kind of, like, you can put some feathers on it, and ribbon shirts, maybe a little bit of wampum beads on it, so we can make it feel like it's us. But it's not us. And that's the problem that I have. We can't accept these compromises for comfort and then pretend that we're doing it for survivability, because that comfort is not about survivability. That comfort is part of the assimilation and part of the demise.
And it's a pattern. I just speak for my own people here. It's a pattern. You go all the way back to slavery. It's like, okay, well, you're not slaves anymore. Be on your way. And we mean be on our way. We don't know how to read. We don't know how to write. We have no idea how to assimilate in society. You're going to help us, give us like a 12-part course on how to survive in this society that you've made? No? Okay. I mean, the Jim Crow laws that were passed, and then, we have the Nigger Bill, or the Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act, and all through that, still so many of us can't vote. Still so many of us don't have civil rights. Julia mentioned all the Black Panthers sitting and suffering in prison. All these compromises that we've made, or in a lot of our minds, in most of our minds, all these laws of quote-unquote progress, all these laws of quote-unquote progress that have been pushed through, we think, well, we're doing okay. We're not all the way there, but we'll get there very soon. And Obama was in there, and we love him no matter what he does. And, we just have to fight Trump because he invented racism. It's just this twisted view, and he already mentioned the lack of education. Our brains are so twisted, we don't know, Sunday from Friday. So we're thinking, Trump started so much of this stuff, and we just need to resist and all that jazz. But it's heartbreaking to see, because when I look at white people as a whole, I'm okay, lost cause, move on. But when I look at, speaking for my own people, there are a lot of us, and I mean a lot, that you can consider lost causes. Friends or family, whomever you associate with as a black person, who believe in this system that much, or believe that it's really not that bad. And no matter what you say to them, facts, figures, science, whatever, they're still going to stick with it. They're still going to, get a little agitated when a black player takes a knee when the national anthem is played and all that stuff. But, assimilation is the preferred option.
Well, and take a look at, just consider for a second the most successful black communities that ever were, and what happened to them.
Oh, yeah.
Look at the number of riots that took place at the beginning of the 20th century. Tulsa, down in Florida, around Washington, D.C. Every one of those race riots, what they call them race riots, was white people destroying black affluence. So every community that was successful, or in the black community, was targeted by white people to be destroyed. And that's exactly what happened. And, 50 miles from Tulsa was the Osage territory. The wealthiest people on the planet in 1920 were the Osage. And white people targeted them for murder and to exploit their land and their wealth. So even when we have success by their standards, which is financially, they will seek to make sure that financial ruin follows right up after it. So the assimilation doesn't really provide us with that much of a future. It's distinction that does. So yeah, there are a lot of lost causes within our people, within people of color, because we still refuse to embrace our distinction as people. Instead, we're still looking to find. We're hoping we can identify progress within the American system. And and Barack Obama was supposed to be a symbol of that progress, and yet Barack Obama was the president during the Keystone XL pipeline, most of that debacle, and he was the president that was in charge when they built the Dakota Access Pipeline. It might have been Trump that got the valve turned on, but it was Obama's presidency that he shows up at Standing Rock at Cannonball on a Flag Day celebration to a flag waving ceremony, giving a speech about how they, quoting Sitting Bull, about how they need to make show progress and make plans for the future of our children. And the only plans that he had in mind was a pipeline to go under the river. There you go.
We'll let it play out. Native water protectors getting their heads bashed in. We'll let it play out.
Yeah.
There's some good points being brought out when with the Tulsa thing, when you started seeing African Americans being successful and then Europeans wanted to destroy that. Well, if you notice too, there's some kind of like in tech industry, there's a lot of European men complaining about quote unquote diversity, and I'm like sitting there kind of thinking, going, in those type of industries, there's majority European men. Are they that terrified that like there's gonna be like one African man over there, possibly one woman of color over there? Like, because some of the complaints are like they're getting preference and all this other stuff, and it's like, is that like that? Like, even though I don't think exactly how they're defining it is true, like very like lenient, as if you're gonna walk in and you don't know what you're doing, somewhere. And it's kind of like interesting psychology-wise. It's like they're that terrified, like as if they don't want no competition. They don't want anybody else getting success.
Yeah, I think that like I think in part though it's like a setup because they're so chauvinistic to the extent of stupidity and going against their own interests. Like if we think about affirmative action, for example, in California. So there's this whole fight about affirmative action. And just like you said, it's going to be some black people that are mediocre and they're going to take the really qualified white people and they're not going to be able to do it, right? Like they're super convinced. They're so chauvinistic that they're just convinced that they're just superior to you. But what the discussion what generally is never raised, because then the liberals are like, no, we should have like diversity requirements, blah, blah, blah. What's never raised is that all these prisons are getting built and 1 or 2 universities get built, and the population is increasing. So it's never a question. The question's never like, hey, actually, maybe we need to have more universities. Maybe there needs to be universal education so that everybody can go to school. And then there isn't an issue about, well, should this person get in or shouldn't this person get in? It's just a right that everybody's entitled to. No, like it's a total setup to play against the historical perspective of white racism and chauvinism, which makes them go against their own interests. And that's what they're doing with Trump. They're cheering on Trump as he cuts their food stamps. You know? And they're like, we love you so much. It's like, oh, well, actually, your food stamps are going to get cut. They even, the Obamacare thing, that's when they kind of, like, got shook a little bit. And they're like, wait a minute, like, that's bad. Like, I'm about to lose my benefits, but not bad enough. And so they just, people have historically gone against their own economic interests for racism. And, yeah, it's incredible to me to witness that over and over again.
Incredible is a good word. And John brought up all the different spots when both of us have, built high societies in different cities, and that lack of education, that lack of identity for both of us, and then just the lack of teaching reality and accepting reality in this country. Central Park had a black population there, very, very wealthy, and they were pushed out. We were pushed out by the government. But people, even within that story that most people don't know, what is left out is Native people had the land before that, and I believe it was the Lenape Nation. And that's left out of that story that is barely told in the first place. And I just want to put that in there because it shows you how vital it is for the two of us to be on the same page and be friends and be allies with each other and be in alliance with each other, because there is no other two groups of people, arguably on the planet, but definitely within these two continents, that are beaten down more by colonial powers. And colonialism has engulfed most of the world.
Yeah, I've been screening a film called Rumble. I don't know if you guys are familiar with this, but it's called Rumble, The Indians Who Rocked the World. And what it is the documentary that talks about the influences of Native music on contemporary American music. But really what the film is about is the collaboration that would exist between Native people and black people in the development of what would become American music, I guess. But it does more than just cross the line or find itself in the music. What you find in the music is the expression and the anger, the rebellion that was there, even as it got tied to things like spiritual music and church music and commercial music. I mean, commercial success. You still heard that intergenerational trauma that came out in the blues, that came out in that guitar lick by Link Ray that would be called Rumble, that came out in in everything from bluegrass to jazz, to all of it. There was an anger, not just a sorrow, but there was an anger and a rebellion that showed itself in all that music. So if you're looking for a film to check out that kind of shows that relationship between Native people and black people historically, and the value that came from that relationship, Rumble is a good film to check out, so I encourage you guys to take a look at it.
That sounds incredible. I will check that out.
Another good example is the Seminole Nation, where they never signed treaties with the squatter United Snakes, and they fought, basically because Europeans are trying to, pretty much enslave black people.
The irony of that is, the Seminoles, which were a mixture of Creek and Zulu warriors, essentially, that would become the Seminole people, or could become known as Seminole people, would never sign a peace treaty with the United States. And the United States, essentially, while they didn't surrender to them, they gave up fighting them. And the irony today is when I think about the university in Florida, calling themselves the Florida State Seminoles, they appropriate the name, they appropriate imagery that has nothing to do with being Seminole. They ride out on a horse on a football field with a guy decked out with feathers and throws a spear into the 50-yard line. And the crazy part is, Seminoles weren't horse people. I mean, they totally bastardized what the Seminole people were, and it seems to be okay. And they say, well, we have permission. The Seminoles of Florida said that that's okay. Now, the Seminoles of Oklahoma didn't necessarily agree with that, but it's an interesting thing to see how the dynamic plays out historically.
So many entanglements with this whole thing, this whole thing called colonialism. So many darn entanglements, and I think that's a great way to end this week's panel, because a major reason why we have the panel in the first place is to push for solidarity between black and Native people, show that it is possible, and show how vital it is for our own liberation as our two people. And Julia, it was great to have you on for the first time. Definitely hope you'll be back. And the rest of y'all, I've enjoyed it as always, and I can't wait till next week.
Thank you, Nolan.
Thank you. I want to thank you all for allowing me on the call. I feel like I learned a lot from what everybody said. I have a question. I don't know, but I have like one real question. It might sound kind of superficial, but okay. There's a show that's on Netflix called Blackstone. Do people say yay or nay or never seen it? It's about like a mythical, fictional tribe in Alberta, Canada. I'm curious about what people liked it or didn't like it or haven't seen it. But yeah, of course I thought it was a great show, but I feel like I don't know enough about Native folks to know if things were whitewashed or not. But it was directed and written and acted. But I'm curious about what people thought if they watched it at all. But anyway, of course I'll be back. Definitely. Thank you.
I haven't seen it, but Nolan, feel free to share contact information among the panelists. I don't mind having conversations that go beyond our roundtable.
Of course, definitely. That's one reason why we have it. All right, y'all. Well, y'all have a great week, and I'll talk to y'all soon.
Okay. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Peace.
Bye, all.
Recorded.